I kind of want to start it off with what's your guys' personal history with Chinatown? Like, what changes did you notice after and before the consumption sites? Like, what was it kind of like before and after, and what was kind of your own history with Chinatown? Why are you connected to it specifically?
Want me to start? Yeah. So I've been an MLA since 2019, and I was running for office prior to then. So I've had a pretty close relationship with the neighborhoods that encompass Chinatown for probably about a decade or so. And I mean, I can say, you know, and you can look back through historical documents. In fact, I was reading an article in the Boyle Macaulay News from, I think, the 80s. I'll have to find it for you. And it was talking about the disorder and whatnot in Chinatown. So one of the challenges I see is when folks say, oh, you know, the supervised consumption sites have led to disorder in Chinatown. It's just not true. There was disorder for years, right? And so it's not a new phenomenon, but that would probably be my kind of overall history. But we can talk more about some of the ins and outs for sure.
Yeah, and like Janis, I was elected as well in 2019, and you know I lived in Edmonton most of my life, and I'd actually used to go to Chinatown quite a bit when I was younger. My hairdresser was in Chinatown, Jade's Hairdressing, right there, still there. I haven't gone in many years, but certainly had been to Chinatown quite a bit growing up in Edmonton. Now, probably my engagement with Chinatown became more after I was elected in 2019, largely because I'm very proud to represent the constituency of Edmonton Whitemud, and we have a really vibrant Chinese Albertan community here in this part of the city. And so I know many of the folks who live in my riding are my constituents. They own businesses in Chinatown. They go to Chinatown quite a bit. We know Chinatown continues to be the center of a lot of cultural activity. And so for me, it was getting to know my constituents better, was really learning about how important Chinatown is to them and spending a lot of time there. You know, I would agree, you know, that with Janis that you know, Chinatown, and not just in Edmonton, but around the world, actually, in North America, Chinatowns face extraordinary challenges. We know that there's a lot of services in Chinatown that bring a lot of different communities of people together and can create those challenges. And I think it's something that's been on the radar for provincial and municipal governments for a very long time about how do we make sure that people get the supports and services they need, where they need them, where they are, where they're going to be helpful. But also we want to make it a safe and vibrant place for all the different communities that are there. We know Chinatown's not just the Chinese community. We know there's Vietnamese, you know, businesses there as well. And we want to make sure that it's home to a lot of communities, and that it's complex, but I think that a lot of people are engaged in trying to make sure that everybody is supported there.
Yeah, because that Chinatown area, like you said, in the past there was already a lot of like issues with that area, like with Chinatown and stuff like that with the government, because Chinese people and the users of consumption sites, those are kind of the two groups of people that have faced a lot of marginalization in society. And Chinatown is not where it was today. And it's like, why are kind of these two marginalized groups and all these marginalized people kind of displaced into this specific area? And I understand that there's going to be a lot of tensions between groups of people within that area, right? What have you guys also done to kind of mitigate the tensions between those types of groups? What have you done to kind of make it better? Because right now, a lot of the Chinese community is like, oh, we don't want consumption sites, but then there's people who are using consumption sites that feel kind of alienated by the people in Chinatown. So there's kind of that, like, it's very common. I hear that a lot when I'm there. So what have you guys kind of done to kind of help with that? And also, like, a question is, why is everyone in that area specifically?
Yeah, well, a couple of things there, and I want to add to what Rakhi said, because I didn't say it in my comments either. You know, the Chinatown is home to so many diverse communities, and you mentioned the Vietnamese as an example, but one of the communities that we have to mention, and in fact, Jordan Hahn and others who are doing incredible community building in Chinatown talk a lot about Indigenous folks, right? That Indigenous to the community, and just really about trying to bring those folks in. And I'm so proud of the work that so many organizations are doing right now, and a lot of the youth in the community are leading. So I don't think we can say a whole lot of like, here's what we've done, but we've certainly supported a lot of those initiatives. And I can point to, the original iteration of the Chinatown Transformation Collaborative years ago, folks like William Lau and whatnot. I know it's changed leadership a little bit, but one of the really cool things that they started doing peak COVID, maybe a little bit earlier, but I think it was peak COVID actually, was the Chinatown cleanups, right? Really bringing community together. I would go almost every month, right? Because it was just a way to get out and help build community and meet, you meet a lot of unhoused neighbors when you're out cleaning up, when you're actually on the streets, and you get to hear a lot of stories, right? And for me, a lot of my work in Chinatown is about relationships, right? Whether it's a relationship with a business owner, whether it's a relationship with someone who lives in the community who might not be part of the Chinese community, like folks in Boyle Street, folks in Macaulay, the neighborhoods that encompass Chinatown, or whether it's unhoused people, right? The unhoused folks on the streets of Chinatown are my constituents, right? They might not have roofs over their heads, but they're my constituents. And so, as Rakhi said, we need to make sure that folks have access to services. And one of the challenges we've had in Chinatown, in Edmonton, and also in other communities is, kind of downtown east side is kind of the equivalent in Vancouver, where you have a large concentration of services, right? And I know this very well firsthand, being the MLA for the area. We have so many of the social service agencies all in that area, right? Hope Mission, Bissell Center, Spady, the list goes on, right? So that's been historically where services have been concentrated, right? Need to meet people where they're at. People are there, that's where their services are. But I've also said, as the MLA, that we need to start being a little bit more creative, especially when it comes to housing. Okay, you know what? Macaulay and Boyle Street, Chinatown, have taken on a very significant share of social housing, of permanent supportive housing projects. So I'm really excited to see that we're seeing a lot more of those happening across the city, right? Yeah. So that it doesn't have to be just in Chinatown. Chinatown doesn't just have to host those sorts of services.
Yeah, and I think Janis and I recently went on a bit of an organized tour of Chinatown, which is, Janis is in Chinatown all the time, and I've spent a fair bit of time there as well. Not like the local MLA, but I'm there, a fair bit too. But we went on more of an organized tour of Chinatown recently with the newly chosen leader of our party, Nahid Nenshi, to give him a little bit of a flavor of Chinatown. And you mentioned how, the original layout of Chinatown is not actually where it is now. We got a little bit of the history of that, right? How things were moved, and you've got the old Chinatown and the new and displaced, absolutely. And of course, if anybody knows the history of Chinatown, and again across North America, but particularly in Canada, where you look back to where the Chinese Exclusion Act came into effect, and there was communities of particularly Chinese men who were not able to bring their family members over to be with them, and who were separated from their family because of the decision of the Canadian government to bring in that act and prevent immigration from China. Well, they came into Chinatown as a place to come together when they were separated from their families, and that's where their culture was definitely located. But then, as you mentioned, it's been displaced. And this, I think what's key about that is to understand that there is a lot of similarities between all the different people living in that community and operating businesses and seeking services and support, which is displacement is a common theme here, right? And I think that's how you end up sort of centralizing services in one area and thinking that that's where everybody will go. But what I think I was really struck by on that tour that we went on was very much so much of the business owners and the young people in particular who are driving a lot of the transformation in Chinatown and are looking to the future. They're thinking about all of the people who lose those services, the Indigenous folks and all the people who are unhoused as part of their community. That came actually through really strong and clear when we were meeting with them, that they weren't seeing them as as outsiders to their community. Actually, we're seeing them as part of their community. And I mean, Janis mentioned it, but this is very true as to how she represents the people in this area, which is that they're all her constituents. They are all Edmontonians. They are all Albertans. They're all Canadians. And they're in this space and people are living together, and we're seeing that approach from organizations, but also from business owners and for people who are active in the community, saying, how can we work together? We do have to think about spreading out services and supports around the city, and being cognizant of where people are. And I think that actually puts an onus on all of us, no matter where we are in the city. I represent a riding that's very southwest Edmonton, quite physically far from Chinatown. But we also have to take responsibility for making sure that we have supports and services in our community here for everyone, so that we aren't concentrating everybody into one part, and kind of leaving them there. We need to embrace it as a whole city and a whole province challenge.
Yeah, because hundreds of people like visit these consumption sites daily, right? And I was talking to someone who worked in harm reduction, and apparently like a lot of drug users are young men or young people who actually are housed and not in the encampments that are kind of concentrated in the Boyle Macaulay Street area. So it's like, shouldn't the city kind of be expanding the number of drug consumption sites? Because I understand that historically that's where these consumption sites are needed the most. However, it's like there are many people who are using drugs like around the city and need a safe way to do that, because it's not safe to use it in your house without like medical guidance, without people there to help you, right? And in one of the studies that I read about why we've kind of built all of these sites within around a kilometer of each other is because the main reason is because users of consumption sites don't want to travel more than 1 kilometer, right? I understand that, but that statement is only applicable to the people who are already there in that area. What about the people around the city that have to travel more than 1 kilometer, have to travel all the way across the city? Because like me personally, I live 40 minutes from downtown, right? And there are a lot of people who, it's not like building, I feel like there's a misconception in the community where they feel as if there's like this thing called like not in my backyard, where they think that if building more consumption sites, suddenly people who do drugs will start popping up, and users of consumption sites will just start doing it on their streets. And I don't think that's true, because people need these services everywhere, right? So I feel like instead of concentrating it in one place, especially in one place where there are already a lot of tensions around marginalized communities, why don't we look towards expanding these services and building more across the city, right?
Well, there's a long answer to that. I'll try to give you the short version, but I mean, you know, we in the Alberta NDP are very much supportive of a range of supports for folks, right? You want to meet people where they're at. So some people are ready for recovery, right? Some people, you know, want to be drug free and are ready to go on that path. There's a lot of others who just are still going to be using drugs. So like you said, if they're going to be using drugs, we want to keep them alive. We've got, you probably know the numbers, you've done your research. I mean, we've had, you know, record numbers of deaths through opioid poisoning, right? Through the drug poisoning crisis, right? And so, yeah, I mean, we would be supportive of expanding services, a range of services across the city. To say that, you know, things are concentrated in the Chinatown area, I mean, that is still true, but you must also remember Boyle Street, their SCS has closed down, right? Spadey is going to be moving. So they're already seeing a movement of these services. I believe the Spadey services are going to be moving further west, and Boyle Street's going to be moving a little bit further north. And so not far, but those sites have been closed, right? So actually there are fewer sites available than there were a few years ago.
Yeah, and I think that it's there's no doubt that Alberta is struggling, and Alberta's not the only one. Again, like the problems we're seeing here are not unique just to Alberta, although we're seeing higher levels, right, of deaths as a result of opioid poisoning, as a result of like per capita, right? Like we're seeing really high rates. None of these things can be distinguished from houselessness, from mental health, from access to very dangerous, poisonous street drugs, right? Like those things are all kind of coming together all at once. So there's no one solution, right? And I think what's really important when we think about things like supervised consumption sites, things like houselessness, things like the range of housing issues that we have. Like there's some permanent supportive housing we need, down to just we need just below market housing. We need all of this range of things. Is that you need to have governments, both municipal, provincial, federal, and communities, realizing that we need all hands on deck. And by that we mean is that not one solution is going to be the answer. So, harm reduction is a really important part of addressing the addictions, not just addictions, because it's not only people who are addicted, it's sometimes it could be one-time users of dangerous drugs out there. We know that harm reduction is important to keep people alive, but we want the full range of supports and services. The problem that we're seeing, particularly in Alberta right now, is a very ideological approach to addictions and to drug poisoning. That's saying we're really only going to focus on recovery. And I think we sometimes run the risk of, in the effort of trying to say we need all these strategies, we may sometimes focus too much on harm reduction. When the reality is we need all of those things, because to put it right back to where Janis began, which we got to meet people where they're at. And if they're not ready for recovery services, then we need to keep them alive. So one day they will be ready for recovery services. But if they are ready for recovery, we need to make sure that space is available and the kind of treatment there is the best available and meets those people where they're at. So the answers are never simple. And that's really the reality of it, is that we can't have black and white approaches to how we're going to deal with the complex issues that we're facing. We need to have governments of all stripes putting themselves in the mentality of all the options need to be on the table. And I think Canadians, Albertans, definitely Edmontonians, are pretty eager to, they care about their neighbors. They're seeing people really struggling, and it's not just happening in Chinatown. They're now seeing in all parts of the city, and all different backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, all of those pieces. And so we need to be seeing solutions that can really put all things on the table, because it is a real crisis that we're facing.
And it's I guess Chinatown hasn't really been a big focus for the city's projects and expansions, I feel in the past few years. And I talked to Karen Tang before, and she said one of the ways we can kind of get the city to focus more on that area, because there are a lot of things that need help in that area, especially, right, is for people to kind of talk to the representatives more, talk to them more, bring in more complaints about the things they want to see. But it's I feel a lot of people in that area are scared of doing that, because it's the Chinese people historically and the users of consumption sites historically have been a very marginalized group. Mm-hmm. Their voices have often been ignored by governments, by the lawmakers, and then again that brings into question the legitimacy of the relationships between lawmakers and who they're affecting, right? But it's how can we encourage people to speak up more, encourage those people who have historically been marginalized, been unheard for decades, right? How can we encourage people to speak up more for whether it be the expansion of Chinatown, the renewal of Chinatown infrastructure, or just about the area in general to make it better?
Yeah, and I mean, maybe I'm taking a bit of an optimistic approach, but I do really sense, even in I guess the 10 years that I've been either running for office or involved in the community, and it's been probably actually longer than that now, I guess it is 2024, maybe more like 12 years, I really have seen, even in that time, mm-hmm. just a growth in the grassroots organizations and movements. And again, a lot of it's coming from the youth, and we've gone yes. to so many festivals and whatnot. I mean, Wilson and Will and all the crew, right? There's just so many young people. I shouldn't just give some people shout outs, because there's so many amazing young people in the community, but right, well, you're a great example, of folks like you who are using your voice and who are, and I do think in some cases, we really are seeing some movement, especially at the city level. Maybe not so much at the provincial level, and that's not just me being politically biased, it's just fact. But for instance, the sale just not that long ago of some of the lands there in the quarters, which is part of Chinatown, for housing. And in fact, I believe Sandy from the CTC was quoted saying actually they're in support of this project because we've got so many empty lots.
Yeah.
What happens in those empty lots? Folks set up tents, right? You don't want to see tents? Well, let's develop and let's try to house some of those folks, right? So I was really encouraged to see that, and that's just one example, but I really do think we've seen, you know, I know that the city again has invested some dollars into Chinatown renewal, and you know, and we've got new, look at Little Bon, you've got new restaurants and businesses popping up all the time. Right, and we're always encouraging. In fact, I got my new glasses from
very nice.
Regent Optical on 98th Street there in Chinatown. We're always encouraging folks to go to Chinatown, right? So anytime I'm like, oh, I need something done, try to go to Chinatown and support local. So I do think that's my long political answer of saying I do really think we are seeing people using their voices more when it comes to drug users and to unhoused folks. Yeah, admittedly, they're probably not able to use their voice a lot. But one thing I can do, and their city councillor can do, and even my colleagues in the legislature do as well, we can amplify their voices, right, as best as we can.
Yeah, and I share that sense of optimism as well too. You know, there's been a number of things that have been happening around the city with the Chinese community in particular, where they are really, you know, drawing some very positive attention to the work they're doing. I was really encouraged by our last tour, even though I know it was like, you know, there was some difficult things to see, and you can see some disorder that was happening in Chinatown. You could also see some really strong enthusiasm from the business owners there. And I will absolutely give credit to the young people who are doing these, like the CBA Youth Council and the events you put on. Like you can feel that energy that's being driven by the young people, and that's how you know things are actually starting to get heard, is because you know when there's that mobilization from young people, that's a really good sign.
It's huge for revitalization, right? But
absolutely.
we want to say, and sorry to interrupt you, Rakhi, but I don't want to forget it, like obviously we are seeing a resurgence in the youth in the community, but to also acknowledge the incredible elders who've built the community, right? And I've met them at the Elders Mansion, and I think about folks like May and others who've been hustling for years and years, right, to get that attention. So it's not to diminish the work of the, because honestly, there have been folks who've been at it for so long, and I you know, huge credit to them because they've faced a lot of adversity. They really have. Sure. The Moss Society folks.
I was just going to mention the Moss Society folks, right?
Yeah.
Because and that's actually what's been really remarkable about the tours we did, but also like seeing at the Canada Day event that happens every year, like it's both communities. It's like the elders of the community and the young people coming together. So of course, I mean, that is our job too as representatives, right? Is to, you know, to elevate those voices. You know, I take it very seriously that so many members of my constituency and my riding, you know, care deeply. That's why I throw myself into better understanding what's happening in Chinatown, because that's what I hear from my constituents, right? And that is the role of a good elected official, is to take those issues forward. There's lots of, you know, I actually want to give a bit of a shout out to our colleague Nathan Epp, who is the MLA for Edmonton Southwest. He's been long involved with many of these organizations, with the CBA in the past, and really bringing those voices forward, and having him elected as one of our Alberta NDP caucus members back in 2023. I mean, he's now bringing that history of his relationships and his engagements and understanding what's needed in Chinatown to our caucus, so we can better represent that in the legislature as well. But it is a conversation that has to be ongoing, and it has to be something that we continue to keep our eye on. And you know, revitalization takes more than just a handful of business owners. It takes a commitment from the city. It takes a commitment from the province. I think it's really important for each level of government to take responsibility for what is their responsibility. And when we talk about public safety and disorder, a lot of that falls on the province, right? And the provincial government is responsible for making sure that that public safety is a priority, as well as making sure that there is enough housing, and shelters are not the only answer, right? And that seems to be the only direction the current provincial government is going on. When they talk about unhoused folks, they want to talk about shelters, but shelters are temporary solutions, and they're not really solutions at all. And so you know, every level of government has to take the responsibility on all of these pieces to make sure that the voices of folks who live in Chinatown, whether that be the Chinese community, whether it be unhoused folks, and it's Indigenous folks, and it's all the people who live around there, are heard, and that we're actually coming up with ideas to make things better.
Yeah, and like I'm just kind of like wondering, what should the provincial government be doing then? Because you said like they're kind of focusing a little too much on shelters and stuff. What should they be doing to make
Look to the housing shadow minister, Janis.
That's great, because that's my shadow minister role, and of course housing is something that I've been passionate about for a long time because it impacts so many of my constituents, right? And so Rakhi's right. I mean, really, we hear a lot about shelters from this government, and for many reasons, shelters are not. They're a band-aid. We're going to need more shelter spaces, safe, accessible shelter spaces as we head into winter. Absolutely, I'm not disputing that. But where there's a lack and where there's a dire need is for affordable housing, right? And for permanent supportive housing, which is the type of housing that offers those wraparound supports for folks to take some of the hardest to house people. And they are successful, especially when it's Indigenous-led projects, because as you likely know, Indigenous folks are grossly overrepresented in our unhoused population here in Edmonton. But there are some real success stories. Niganan Housing is an Indigenous-led housing organization that has one of their projects is called Ambrose Place, and it's based in Chinatown. And if you haven't looked it up, I would do that, because there's actual data to show how successful their model has been, and they've truly taken the hardest to house folks with who've lost limbs due to amputations from being out on the streets, right? Folks with severe trauma of all forms, and have been able to house them. And their data shows that not only does it save those folks' lives, it also saves money, right? Because you're taking that strain off of the emergency rooms, right? And you can look at data from Royal Alexandra Hospital, how many folks go there for, unhoused folks who go there for attention or for a warm place just to to get out of the elements, right? So we need more of those projects, and Niganan has expanded. They've opened another one called Pamatsuin, also in my area, in the old Sands Hotel, right? So kind of repurposing old hotels to house folks, and again offer that supportive housing. So we need a lot more Indigenous-led housing, permanent supportive housing, and just broadly like the non-market kind of housing that we lack. There's a story in the Journal today of an Indigenous woman named Carol Powder, who she's known for being Chubby Cree. It's this drumming band that has, Noah and the drummers who've performed. They've performed in Chinatown. Actually, they performed at the mural unveiling. With
I was also there.
So you probably saw them drum, right? And that's just one example of many. But Carol was willing to share her story with the Edmonton Journal. She is a grandmother to 10 grandkids that she has taken in. She's lost her housing, so she's living in a hotel right now. And is unable to find housing. And I give that as an example because there's such a lack of housing for families, right, that's affordable. And because our rental market is so hot right now, there's just such low vacancy, and rents are increasing faster in Edmonton than anywhere across Canada. So there's a whole lot of factors there. The answer there being, we need a government that will invest in housing. I could talk about housing for hours.
So and housing is when we're talking about unhoused folks, that's like the obvious where we need to see a great concentration and effect from the provincial government. But you just mentioned something, Janis, that's a fact that I can't stop thinking about. When I was first elected, I met with Boyle Street, and they told me about how 95% of the people that they support on the streets in Edmonton came through the child intervention system. They came through the child welfare system. So that is a provincial responsibility, right? So when we talk about what the province is responsible for, if we're not keeping families together, if we're not keeping families and keeping parents supported and make sure that they are able to be the best parents, and we're going to see more children being taken away from their parents, placed in kinship homes, placed in which, again, that's a whole spectrum of activity that the government should be prioritizing, because that's sort of the front end of issues, right? Like if young people are growing up not at home, not supported by a family, because we're talking about long histories of trauma. We have incredible overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in the child intervention system. That leads to more people in very fragile spaces of they're going to be on the streets and more likely to be exposed to drug poisoning, all of those pieces. Like, it sounds like an overwhelming amount, but you can't just approach these challenges from a band-aid situation of here's shelters, here's more police on the street, which, by the way, we have to note too, the provincial government has been underfunding municipalities like the city of Edmonton dramatically for the last 5 years, which means there's less available for boots on the ground police, right? So but we can't just be addressing these issues after the fact by saying, okay, now we've got a houseless person, we've got somebody suffering from addiction, we've got somebody with mental health challenges, we're going to put them in a shelter, without talking about how did they get here to begin with.
Like the root of the problem.
Exactly. The roots of the problem. Healthcare is a huge challenge across the spectrum, even from just even having access to primary care, right? So if somebody doesn't have access to primary care, they're more likely to get more ill, maybe be on disability, make them more vulnerable in that sense as well. It's a holistic approach, right? Not one of these things is an answer, and they're not easy answers, but government has to take the responsibility for the health and well-being of our society. And that is a full spectrum approach. When you underfund healthcare, when you underfund housing, when you underfund municipalities, that's how we start to see the deterioration in supports and services. And that's how we start to see people falling through the cracks and becoming more vulnerable than ever before. So when we say what should the province be doing, there's so much they can be doing. But I actually think it begins with taking responsibility for governing. And governing means for all people, wherever they are, wherever they live, whatever their circumstances, that is the responsibility of a provincial government, and that's what they should be focused on right now.
I see. So you guys have both kind of had a lot, you guys have both obviously heard a lot about Chinatown, have been representing people who care about that area for a long time. So I guess what are some common complaints or criticism you've received about Chinatown before? I guess COVID did make everything a little bit harder, well, a lot harder for everyone, not only the people who are unhoused, people who are using consumption sites, but also the people who are in Chinatown, right? So it's kind of, what are the most common complaints, criticism, and have they gotten worse or increased after COVID?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have access to the numbers off the top of my head because I know there's some of this is actually being tracked. And I remember reading something, and I'll have to find it for you, just about the around needle debris and how there was this false narrative that there was so much more needle debris, but the actual numbers showed that there weren't. But I'll have to find the data just so I'm not just throwing off a number off the top of my head. But again, I mean, I know it's probably not what you want to hear, but I really do take the positive approach, and that yes, there's still people who are concerned about safety and maybe hesitant to visit Chinatown. But I think of even Brandon at the mural unveiling. I don't think I've actually mentioned Brandon yet. Shout out to Brandon and Izzy Rock and the amazing work that he did, because he talked about that at the mural unveiling. That you were there, Chinatown After Dark, right? That amazing event. Just talked about the power of bringing people together, and I think because we've really, we've helped a little, but really these community leaders, acknowledging that we're all in this together, right? That we're working hand in hand with Indigenous folks, with maybe longtime Caucasian members of the Boyle Street community, whatever it might be, all working together to really try to grow Chinatown. And the cool thing is, Rakhi kind of alluded to this, there's actually not that big of a Chinese population in Chinatown. It's actually pretty small. You can look at the riding profiles, other than the Elders Mansion and whatnot. Most Chinese folks, or folks of Chinese descent, live all around the city, but they're so invested, right? You have one of the ridings with the biggest Chinese population, so does Nathan and Rhiannon in the south, but those folks are just so invested in Chinatown, and I just see, I continue to see an upsurge in hope and resilience, right? So when people talk about the safety issues or talk about their concerns, they're often met with, yeah, you're right, but here's what we're doing to make it better, right? And that's what I try to do when I get complaints to my office, is to talk about the good work that's happening, right? So
yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think look, the challenges are there. We've heard them about concerns about concentration of services and of course public disorder, and public safety issues. Those are all there, and they haven't been fixed clearly, right? We're still working on all of those, but I think that's a challenge that a lot of people seem up to meeting, right? I think a lot of people are really collaborating, and we're seeing that happen more and more, and people are trying to say, I think what's really come through is it's not just the folks who own businesses in Chinatown, but people are seeing a value in the cultural history of Chinatown, and there's a real appreciation for that, and that idea of this is something special that we want to preserve and we want to maintain and we want to see flourish. And I don't sense an apathy from people about that. I generally feel like people are like, yeah, they're committed on that goal, right? They do want to be making Chinatown a vibrant place. And it is on all of us to continue to encourage people to go. You know, we've eaten there, and
We should go back again soon, actually.
I'm looking for a little hot pot, maybe.
Yeah.
I love hot pot.
And you know, I think we're just continue to encourage people to be there because we also know whether it be Chinatown or even other parts of downtown Edmonton, it's about making sure people feel like it is their space, that it's part of their community, and part of that's just going there, being there, you know, shopping there, eating there, doing all of those things, and making it a place that we all feel comfortable in. And part of that isn't about hiding the disorder or hiding the folks who are struggling. It's about actually finding supports for them. Because I don't think anybody's looking to just say we don't want to see it, right? And I think sometimes we worry about like the approach of just taking apart encampments doesn't mean those people no longer need support and are unhoused and are struggling. It's that we just don't see it anymore. But I think people know better than to realize that than to think that it deals with the problem. You actually have to support people, and I think once we're seeing it happening all around the city too, I think people are like, you know what, we don't want to just move it around. We want people to find what they need. And I genuinely feel like there is a momentum in that direction to get people the support they need.
So like instead of, I guess, moving people to other places, kind of making that already established area somewhere where people can feel more at home, like with each other, and more like a community basically.
Again, it comes back to the need for if folks are choosing to live there, make that area their home, we need to give them the supports they need, right? And that's where I said I'm really hopeful about the fact that especially the city has made a lot of really great housing sites in other areas, right? So we can show that other neighborhoods can take this on and can be successful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah. Was there anything else that you really wanted to get to? We can.
I guess
it's just
I feel like you guys have all covered it, because my last kind of like question was about like what can youth do to make Chinatown like a nicer area, and you guys can all cover that. Like there's a lot of groups now working towards that. So
and we can keep talking with folks like you, because honestly, and I'm not just saying that, but like when you reached out to us, I was like, oh my goodness, a high school student who wants to do this work, like absolutely, right? And just we're grateful for you and for your friends and your peers who care about this work and are doing the work on the ground. And so just we're thankful, and you've got our commitment, Rakhi, myself, our leader Nahadenshi, that we will continue to fight for Chinatown each and every day.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.